Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm the Mad Catster, and today we have a bizarre and curious topic to discuss, and that is witchcraft. Now, it's not every day that you see a headline like this where the legislature of the state is being asked to pardon a woman convicted of witchcraft in 1692. But here in New England, sometimes bizarre shit like this happens. It's not that bizarre for us given our history, and this is just one of those things that pops up every now and again. But come with me as we go back to 1692 in the first in my series that's called Somewhere in Crime, and we will talk about the curious and tragic case of Elizabeth Johnson Jr. Now, most people have heard of or know a little bit about the witchcraft trials and witchcraft hysteria of 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts. But, of course, we all know that there actually were never any witches in Salem. But please, don't tell the 100,000+ people that come into downtown Salem on Halloween night, because Salem is now the Halloween capital of the world. But anyways, the tragedy is that a total of 25 people died from this nonsense. Some of them were hanged, one guy was pressed to death, and then the others died of the filth of the jail that they were held in for months and months. After the fact, many of them petitioned the state legislature for pardons, which were granted, but not everyone did. And Elizabeth Johnson Jr., who we're going to talk about today, was unfortunately one of the ones who had not been pardoned. Now, this law, which is what this article about, that's before the state legislature, that will probably get passed, that will give her a pardon. She's one of the, I don't know if she's the last, but one of the last who has not yet received an official pardon. Elizabeth Johnson was very young when this happened to her. She was only 22, and she wasn't the only person in her family accused. Her mother and some of her other relatives were accused as well, which is tragic. We call her Elizabeth Jr. because her mother was also Elizabeth, and she's Elizabeth Sr., but Elizabeth Jr. is actually referred to that way in the records. That's the other reason that we call her Elizabeth Jr., not just to distinguish them for the story, but because that's how they distinguish them. Once a person was accused, they were arrested, they were held in jail, they were examined. Basically, a confession was coerced out of them. They sometimes sat in jail then for months before they were indicted, and then they stood trial, and in general they were convicted. The lucky ones were either acquitted or they pled guilty and begged mercy of the court. But in any event, it didn't matter. Your life was ruined, your family's reputation was ruined, and it usually brought negative consequences which were felt for a long time in the families. 19 of the victims were hanged on what's known as Gallows Hill, and today it's still known as Gallows Hill in Salem. And it's a common misconception. People think that witches were burned at the stake. Well, that did happen in Europe, but here in the Salem witch trials, they were all hanged. Nobody that I know of was burned at the stake. Amazingly, though, just a few years ago, archaeologists, with the help of historians, were able to pinpoint the exact spot on Gallows Hill where the witches were hanged. And even though it was called Gallows Hill and always has been called Gallows Hill, nobody remembered exactly where the hangings had happened. And it was through this investigation that they actually determined precisely where this was. And miraculously, nothing had been built on the spot. And now, just a few years ago, they've erected a permanent monument to those who were the tragic victims of the 1692 witch hysteria. Salem Village and Town accounted for about 25% of the accused. The vast majority came from outside of Salem. A lot of them came from a nearby town called Andover, which is where Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was from. At the time, Andover had a population of about 600 people. And of those 600 people, 50 of them were accused of witchcraft, which is pretty amazing for a town of 600 to have that high percentage. And what's even weirder is that 42 of the 50 were actually related to each other, which kind of gives you a hint that there might have been something political or some kind of vendetta going on. But anyways, that's a different story. It wasn't until 1709 that the survivors were granted reparations and given their property back, which is pretty amazing because they realized long before that this was all a travesty. So what about Elizabeth Johnson? Well, Elizabeth Johnson was born in Andover in about 1670, and she was born to Elizabeth Dane Johnson and to Stephen Johnson. Her father, when this all came about, her father had already died, so her mother was a widow raising her kids on her own. So this was probably even doubly tragic, given that there was only one parent in the house, and that parent, as we will talk about, she also was accused and arrested for witchcraft. Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was the first person in her family to be arrested, and she was only 22 at the time. She was arrested because of accusations made by the Carrier family children. It's suspected that those accusations came from torture, which is pretty disgusting. And later, Elizabeth Jr. actually testified against the Carrier children in this whole circus. After she had languished in prison for many days, Elizabeth's mother was accused and arrested also in August of 1692, and she too was jailed. She was also jailed along with her sister, Elizabeth Jr.'s aunt, her Elizabeth Jr.'s little sister, Abigail, who was only 10 at the time, and her teenage brother. Now, Abigail Faulkner, who was Elizabeth Sr.'s sister, the two of them were arraigned at the same time. And Elizabeth Sr. said that Abigail, her sister, had told her that she would rip her to pieces if she confessed. But of course, they exacted a confession from her anyway. Elizabeth, even during this process, implicated her son who had been arrested for witchcraft. Many other of her family were arrested, but a lot of them were later let go and vindicated. But there are several factors that may have played into why the Johnson family was so targeted and so persecuted. And one of them was that Elizabeth Jr.'s grandfather, who was the older Elizabeth's father, he was a Reverend Dane, and he early on during the witchcraft hysteria had come out publicly and spoken against the witchcraft hysteria. The other factor that comes into play is that Elizabeth Sr. had been charged with fornication because she had had premarital relations with Elizabeth's father. Obviously, they later were married, but Stephen Johnson. But Elizabeth's grandfather, Reverend Dane, he had written a letter early in 1692, and this is basically what he said. He said, "I believe many innocent persons have been accused and imprisoned. The conceit of spectral evidence as an infallible mark did too far prevail with us. Hence we so easily parted with our neighbors of honest and good report, and members in full communion. Hence we so easily parted with our children, when we knew nothing in their lives, nor any of our neighbors to suspect them, and thus things were hurried on. Hence such strange breaches in families. Several that came before me that spake with much sobriety, professing their innocency, though through the devil's subtlety they too were much urged to confess. And we thought we did do well in doing, yet they stood their ground, professing they knew nothing, never saw the devil, never made a covenant with him, and the like. And some children that we have cause to fear, that dread has overcome them, to accuse themselves in that they know not." Basically, what he's saying is, this is a load of nonsense. These people profess their innocence. We had no reason to suspect them of any kind of wrongdoing because they led exemplary lives, but somehow, confusingly, they confessed. And the spectral evidence that he talks about was evidence that basically a witness would come forward and say that one of the accused had appeared to them either in a dream or in a vision and had somehow physically harmed them or done something to torture them. And this was accepted, I can't believe this, but it was accepted by the court as actual, factual, hard evidence. And many of the people who were arrested, this is how they were convicted. Now, of course, we look at it now and we go, that's just nonsense. That would never be admissible in a court, let alone the fact that the whole concept of spectral evidence is just ridiculous. But it was used and it convicted a lot of people. Elizabeth Jr. was accused and arrested on August 10th of 1692, and she was brought to Salem because even though she was from Andover, they brought all of the accused to Salem to be arrested, to be examined. After they examined, they would extract a confession, then they would languish in jail, and at some point down the road, they would be indicted, and then they would stand trial where most likely they were convicted. Most of the cases ended up with a conviction. But Elizabeth, she was arrested on August 10th of 1692, taken to Salem and jailed, but she was examined starting on the 10th, the day she was arrested, and going on into the 11th the next day. Through that period of interrogation, she, of course, ended up breaking down. She gave a false confession, and she was held for indictment. And basically, what her confession said was, the examination of Elizabeth Johnson Jr. taken before Dudley Broads the 10th of August 1692. She confesseth as followeth. The Goody Carrier brought a book to her, and she set her hand to it. The Goody Carrier baptized her when she baptized her daughter Sarah, and the Goody Carrier told her she should be saved if she would be a witch. That she had been at Salem village with Goody Carrier, and that she had been at the mock sacrament there, and saw Mr. Burroughs there. She confessed she had afflicted several persons, that the first she afflicted was Lawrence Lacey, and that she and Thomas Carrier afflicted Sarah Phelps, Mary Walcott, and Ann Putnam on the 9th of August, and that she afflicted them this day as she came to town, and that she hath afflicted a child of Ephraim Davis on the 9th of August by pinching it, and that she afflicted Ann Putnam with a spear, that she and Goody Carrier afflicted Benjamin Abbott, that Goody Toothaker and 2 of her children were with her that last night when she afflicted the children. She also confessed that when Daniel Elms of Boxford was with her, on the 8th and 9th of August at night, and he afflicted Sarah Phelps, and told her he had been a witch ever since he ran away, and that he had a hand in afflicting Timothy Swan. Elizabeth Jr. languished in jail for several months before she was finally indicted, and she stood trial. And on January 11, 1693, her indictment was issued, and this is what it said in part. Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. of Andover, in the county of Essex, single woman, being indicted by the jurors for our sovereign lord and lady, the king and queen, upon their oaths by 2 several indictments, that is to say, first, for that she, the said Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. of Andover, single woman, about 3 years since, wickedly, feloniously, and maliciously a covenant with the devil did make, and was baptized by the devil, and renounced her former Christian baptism and God and Christ, by which wicked and diabolical covenant with the devil, in manner of form aforesaid, she, the said Elizabeth Johnson, is become a detestable witch against the peace of our sovereign lord and lady, the king and queen, their crown and dignity, and the laws in that case made and provided. Elizabeth was tried and convicted, of course, but she was not executed. She was held in jail for a while, and it was at this point in time that things started to unravel. Now, the reason why things started to unravel, of course, this won't surprise you, was because the royal governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, Governor Phipps, his wife was accused of witchcraft. And that's when he sort of said, okay, stop, that's enough of this nonsense. And he dissolved the courts that were holding the trials. He also pardoned all accused witches that were still in custody. Now, still in custody but not convicted. So those who were convicted were not at this point pardoned. One of those that he pardoned who was in jail was a woman named Tituba, and some of you may be familiar with her. She was a black slave from the Caribbean who practiced basically voodoo, or a type of voodoo, and it was her involvement in the very beginning that started all of this, or was this part of what had started all of this, and the girls that had made the initial accusations. Now, Tituba, unfortunately and sadly, was at this point then sold back into slavery, and we don't know what happened to her after that. On January 14, 1697, the General Court of Salem ordered a day of fasting to commemorate the terrible and tragic victims of this whole hysteria. In 1702, the General Court of Salem also called the witchcraft trials unlawful. And that's when, basically, in the official record, the reputation became infamous, and the whole horrible reputation started about the witchcraft trials, because they were finally officially denounced. The trials became a dark shunned part of American history, as I'm sure you're aware. We're still talking about them here in 2021, for God's sake. In 1711, some of the victims were absolved by the legislature by an act of the royal government, but it was only a handful of people. It wasn't everyone, and through the centuries, it's come in dribs and drabs that various people have been acquitted and their names cleared. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like if you did. I'd really appreciate it. This is the first in a series of stories I'm going to be doing for this Somewhere in Crime series. If there's anything you would like me to look into or cover or do a story about, let me know in the comments. I'll be doing a story next that I've already started researching about a horrific murder that took place in 1830 in Salem of a prominent sea captain. It was so gruesome and horrible that it not only reverberated through the community but through the country and even around the world, and brought some really big names into the equation to try to get justice for what had happened. And there's actually some groundbreaking precedent that happened during the trial. But I did get to actually handle firsthand evidence, the actual evidence from the trial, and that was pretty interesting. I just have to shoot some B-roll footage and write a script and put it all together. But let me know if there's anything you'd like to see. Again, if you like the video, hit the like. Please subscribe to keep on top of what I'm doing. And thanks very much, and take care.
Pretty please. Subscribe, like, and hit the bell. I get a treat for every new sub. Thank you.